We can go ahead and get started. So give me one sec to pull some stuff up. Yesterday we kind of introduced Rails as a whole, and uh it was a lot of information all at once. So we are actually going to pump the brakes a bit, and we are going to tackle it one piece at a time. So yesterday we went through all of this stuff of Rails, of the controllers, views, models, etc. But today, and in the next few days that we are going to continue on, we're going to tackle it one by one. So we'll handle the models today in the database, and then we'll slightly go into like more stuff with the views a little bit today if we have time, but tomorrow will be mostly about the views and the controllers. So that's what we are going to be doing next few days. So yesterday was a grand overview. Today is going to be just one piece at a time, just chipping at it so we can understand a little bit more about it. So right here, this is where our main focus is. And we are going to start a new project for each of the days that we are learning some stuff. So when we are creating our project for today, that will also be a brand new project than what we did yesterday. And if we go to another one, that will be a brand new project as well. So you'll have multiple projects because they do follow a certain amount of steps. And then we'll talk about those steps there. Okay. So for this part, you are going to follow along as well, just so you can know the process about the models part. So go ahead and make sure that when you are creating a Rails project, you're CD into the right directory. So CD into your desktop. Go ahead, James.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, when you say following along, are we doing this? Are we following along and doing the same thing with you on iTerm, or just like observing?
A little bit of both. So for these steps, you would also type it into your iTerm as well.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Yep. But yeah, within this lecture, some of it will be conceptual stuff. So that is where you would just follow along by just visually following along. Other stuff we'll be doing it as a class. And then after we CD into your desktop, you are going to CD into the DPL directory. Mine is called DPL Winter. Yours might be similar. So just change that to be whatever your DPL folder is called. And then lastly, we have one more step here. And typically when we create a new project, we would make a new directory for it, right? So we would sometimes do a make dir and then the name of the project. But with Rails, it actually does that for you. So you actually don't need to create a whole new project or a whole new directory because as soon as you do the Rails command, it will go ahead and do that command for you. Let me show you where you can find this, and then we'll do it as a group. Just so that you can, you don't need to take too much notes because there is going to be a reference sheet that you can use here. So inside of the DPL sheets, it will be in the Rails references right here. And then we are actually doing these steps here that we are going to tackle one by one. And I'll explain each of the steps one by one, but this is where you can find those steps that we're about to do. So it's the initial project step. So when you start a new Rails project, it will be right here. So if we want to create a new project, it will be with the Rails new command, and it would be following by the project name. So let me go ahead and Slack this out, and then I'll show you what these other things that we also add on into it. So right here, when we are specifying the project name, make sure that the project name is connected with the underscore, or else they will think that it is a totally different thing within Rails. So that's why when I say contact list, if I say contact space list, it doesn't know what list is, and it will create a project called contact, and it might throw you an error. So make sure that if you do have multiple words like this one here, you have it by the underscore. And then with the Rails new command, this is how we are going to be creating a new project. So anytime that you're creating a new Rails project, this is going to be the name of the project that you create. So this is also will create the directory and all the files and folders within that directory. Before we press enter, we actually added two new options that we add on with this project. So the two options is this first option, which is -d, which specifies what default database it is that we are using. By default, it comes with SQLite. We're not going to be using SQLite just because it's a lot more scalable if we were to use PostgreSQL, which is this little elephant here. So that's why we need to specify that our default database is going to be PostgreSQL. The last thing that we need is this other flag right here. And this is kicked off to the next line. But this is going to be saying that we want a little bit of React installed inside of our project, because that's how we'll be handling the views. We won't be using the traditional Rails views that comes straight out of the box. We're using our own views with React here. So this is how you would typically create your projects. It's with the Rails new command and then whatever the project name is. So this part will change depending on your project name. But all the rest of the stuff would be the same at the beginning. So go ahead and press enter and run this. And while that is running, that will create for you a bunch of things for you all. And then also make sure that your little elephant is running. So if it's not here, if you don't have this little elephant, you can do a command space, which will do a spotlight search. Again, that's command space. And then you can search up Postgres like so. And once it pops up, I guess. Once you click on this little elephant, that should give you that little elephant at this corner right here. So again, command space, type in Postgres, and that will give you that little elephant there. And then also see if there is a green check mark there as well. Make sure that it is started or initiated if that is the first time you are using it. Because we will want to have it work before we add anything into it. So Postgres itself is what is going to be housing all of our databases. So that's where we'll be storing our databases there. Go ahead, Freddie.
I just wanted to know, is it supposed to, because I ran the command, right? Is it supposed to say after a minute, Rails aborted, don't know how to build task, webpacker, install reach, and then it just says see the list of available tasks with Rails. And then it says, did you mean, and then a lot of other things.
I would double check to see if you copy and pasted the right stuff.
Okay.
Because it might be this part right here that is not correct, the last part.
Okay. So just take it from,
Yeah, just take it from
I
Slack.
run it again.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. I will go ahead and try that really quick. I'm pretty sure I did it though. Okay, so it says exists for most of them. It says identical.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then it says conflict at .git ignore.
That's fine as well.
Okay, so does that mean I'm all good?
Yeah, you should have it generated at least.
Okay, and then it just says overwrite users, and then like a bunch of other stuff. I don't know what to put after that.
Are you taken into the next cursor yet?
Yeah, it threw, so it says overwrite users Freddy desktop, and then I'm at another line.
Yep, then you should be good.
Okay, all right, just want to make sure. Thank you.
Yep. But yeah, if there's anything wrong with this first step, it'll give you an error. And then depending on the error, you would need to double check if everything is all good here. So that's the first step, is that after you create a new project with the project name, you need to pass in these different options for it. And then that is how we are going to get started there. So after you create the project, you need to CD into the project, because right now that just creates all of the folders and files. We need to go into that particular folder. So it is going to be CD contact list winter 21. Because all of the commands that we'll be running is within this folder right here. If you were to run it anywhere else, it will give you an error saying that it doesn't know what you mean, or you might be in the wrong spot, things like that. So that's why it's really important for us to CD into our Rails project. And then let's go ahead and open this up into our default editor, and I'll kind of point out the places again of where you would need to pay attention to, because it does generate a lot of files and folders. And if you want a quick intro of what they are, I would refer back to the lecture yesterday. Okay, so this is what it generates for you. It's a bunch of files and folders and directories here. Go ahead, Freddie.
Sorry. I was telling you it kicked me off to the next line, but it didn't like it's didn't kick me off like usual, right? Where it says like waiting for the next command. It just says overwrite. And then I tried to do CD into contact list, and then it just gave me a bunch of options. It was like, yes, overwrite, no, do not overwrite.
Yeah, so you would press yes to override
Oh.
because you technically created another project.
Okay, so I just press yes.
Yep,
And
or
make it.
Y. Yep.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, so for those errors, you would just follow what the prompt says.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep. So here within our files and directories, we are going to have a bunch of them. So let me point out the main folders and the files that you are going to be working in the most. Because again, we won't be going into every single folder and file because most of them are just for configurations and just to have Rails working. So for the folders, the ones that you would need to worry about is the app folder, the config folder, and the database folder. So app, config, and DB there. All the other ones, again, those are more for extra features and other things that just to get Rails up and running. This is kind of something that I would pay attention to, but towards the end, is that there is a node modules folder. And if you're no longer using the project anymore, I would delete this folder because you can grab this a little bit later. Just delete this folder after you are done with the project. Because it does add up. It does have a lot of code and other things into it. So we would just delete it so it doesn't take up too much space. But besides that, it'll be app, config, and DB. So within, oh, well, I'll go through those in a sec. And then outside of the folder in the main directory, it'll be the gem file, which is this file right here, as well as your gignor occasionally. And then sometimes you might need to look into your Ruby version. So depending on what type of project it is, you might need to do a specific Ruby version. This is where we are going to change that version. But typically it should grab it from your computer, and that would be the most up-to-date one. So the main ones that you would need to worry about outside of here is going to be the gem file, the Ruby version file occasionally, and then occasionally the gignor. If you do need to ignore additional stuff, that will be inside of here. And then all the other ones, we won't be using them as much. So let me go into these folders, and then I'll go into which files it is that we would need to go and take a look at. So inside of the app.js, this is where you'll be doing the bulk of your coding. Is going to be inside of this app.js. And the main parts is going to be the controllers, the models, and then inside of the JavaScript, there will be one called components. You don't have this yet. I'll show you how we can get this, but I just did it before class just so you can kind of visually see that. But later on, when we run this next command, you will also get one called components here within the JavaScript. So those are the main places that you would need to worry about. The other ones are, again, extra features and other things that we can use in addition to those other features. Within the config folder, and this is alphabetical, so if I ever mention like go to your DB folder or go to your config folder, they're all alphabetical, so you can kind of see them pretty easily. So the config one here, this is where it will run all of the configurations, but the one file that you would need is going to be routes.rb. So this file right here. So this is the only file that you would need to worry about within the config folder. And then the DB, we'll come back to this because there's nothing in here yet. we'll generate stuff that will be displayed within the DB folder. But that's another place that we would need to take a look at is the DB folder. Go ahead, Freddie.
Sorry, I just wanted to know, because I'm still a little bit confused. When exactly would we use this or what for?
Now going forward.
Going forward.
Yep. So every single time you're creating an application, you'll be creating a Rails application for the backend.
Okay, and this just helps like making things easier for us, right?
So this is how we are going to be combining web development with a functional way with React.js, as well as storing things within a database, because you can't do that with regular HTML or JavaScript.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So yeah, so you'll be using this majority of the rest of the cohort, because this is what will be used for the backend stuff. But yeah, so those are the files and folders that you'll need to worry about. And it is those files and folders there. So one of the things that we would need to do is we need to have some housekeeping items before we get started. Because if we don't do those housekeeping items, it will bite us a little bit later if we aren't doing those at the right steps. So let me close out everything. So the first housekeeping item is going to be within your gem file. So go ahead and go into your gem file here. And right here, this is where all of the gems are needed for the individual project for it to run. So here, these are all of the main gems that we have. And then there's also gems within these groups here. So the development and tests, and only for testing and only for development. So those are for, they would only work for if you were inside of their environment. So within Rails, there's going to be different environments that you can be in. One of them is going to be testing, the other one's going to be development, and then later on we'll go into the production. So that's why there are certain gems that we would need at certain areas. We only need to worry about development for now. We won't be worrying too much about testing. So most of the gems that we would add, it will be within this section right here on the outside of the group. Because if we were to put them in the group, it might not have access to it. But there are a few places where we would put like pry and stuff, because we only want that here in the development and testing, but not in the main application. And then the other thing within this file is that we are specifying the Ruby version. So this is what should match up with this Ruby version here. So those two versions should match up so it knows what kind of Ruby version it is that it's doing. So the first thing that you would need to add is going to be all of the additional gems that you would need for the project. And for now, the gem that you would always need, since we are using React, is going to be the gem React on Rails gem. So just put this line of code around line 30 inside of the gem file. Give me 1 sec. Let me do this next part, and then I'll stack this whole thing out. The other thing is that we also need a debugger. So within your development test group on line 32 and 35, go ahead and delete it. We're not going to be using bybug. You can if you want to, but we'll be using pry. That will be the most common one that we'll be using for debugging. So that's what the two gems that we would have for now. It's going to be React on Rails and then the gem pry going forward. So here is the gem file, and then this will happen around line 30. And then this is what your line 30 through line 34 should look like. So I would delete bybug and then add in these two new gems here. And then any other gem that you would need to add, it would be, depending on what it is, you can add them here as well. Just note that colorize doesn't work here because colorize is a console gem. And this is dealing with websites. We're creating websites with Rails. So colorize won't work in this particular case. I think it will display some stuff colorize, but then the website itself, it won't display anything inside of the browser. So just know that it should be anything web related that will apply for this particular gems here. Afterwards, after you add in all of the gems that you would need, for now we only have these two, we will go back into our terminal, and then we are going to be running the bundle, which is short for bundle install. And this will install all of the gems inside of our project. So this will install all of the gems that is within our project. And not only does it install all of the gems that we specified within the gem file, but if that gem requires other gems, it will also install those as well. So that's why it might take a while, or it might even grab in other gems that you probably don't recognize because these are just the gem dependencies that it needs for it to work. Go ahead, Danny.
When we run the bundler, should we be saving the gem file beforehand, or does that make a difference?
Yeah, make sure that your files are saved.
Okay, so if I didn't save it and I ran it, I just realized that I didn't save it. Is that okay?
Yeah, so go ahead and save it
Okay.
and then run it again. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, sweet. Thanks.
Yep. So yeah, I would get into a habit of command S-ing. So after we do our gems here, that would be with this command. So again, that is just short for bundle install. We can just do bundle here. Go ahead, James.
I'm sorry. So I tried running bundle and it just produced a lot of red. The error that I got was there was an error parsing gem files, syntax error, unexpected end of input, expecting end.
Yeah, so that means that you might have copy and pasted incorrectly.
I see.
So there might be an extra n or one too many n's. So I would just double check and just add in at least this gem here.
So that's what it looks like on mine. So yeah. So group development test do gem pry end. Huh, okay.
Yeah, I can send out the whole file if that helps. But yeah, there's something wrong with your gem file.
Yeah. Cool, thank you. I'll try this.
Yep. So after you install all of the gems, we need to go ahead and do any sort of configurations for the gems to work. Some of them don't need anything and you can use them right out of the box, like pry. You don't need to do anything with that. But with React on Rails, we need to run an additional line of code. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So that would be bundle exec, and we'll explain what this is doing. So it'll be Rails G React install. Go ahead and press enter on this. I technically already did this step. So what this will do is that bundle exec, anytime that we are using bundle exec, technically we don't need it, but when we are using it, it will run the line of code within this project environment. So this will go ahead and guarantee that we are running this particular line of code within my contact list winter 21. So it would work regardless of whether I have bundle exec, but there are rare errors where you would need to run it at the exact place. So that's why you would include bundle exec. So sometimes you would see us use bundle exec, other times you would just see us jump right into Rails and then just do it from here forward. That will still work as well. It's just that, just note that you're able to do it both ways. There are rare errors where you would need to do it like this. And then this part right here, this is going to be a Rails command. So a Rails command is going to help you generate a few things like your models, your controllers, etc. What this is doing is that this G here is short for generate. You can technically write out generate, but it will be shorthand for generate. And we are generating the React install. So the React install is part of the gem of React on React Rails. Is that what it's called? Yep, React Rails gem. And what this will do is that it will install React and configure it and combine it and everything like that into our project. So that will go inside of our app JavaScript, and then you'll get some configuration files around here. But now you would see a components folder within the JavaScript file now. So this is where we'll be handling the views, is within this components here. So you would need to do that step as well. And then any other step that your gem require you to do anything, you would do those steps as well. So I would go ahead and take a peek at the documentation just to make sure. But this is one of those things that you would need to do. So go ahead and press enter, and that would be the next step for our housekeeping item. Okay, our other housekeeping item that we need to get out of the way before we get started is to create an initial database. So to create an initial database, you can use the command Rails or you can use rake. Either one works. You can use one either way. And this one will work with any DB command. So if you're doing a DB command, you can switch them off with Rails or rake. I'm just going to do Rails just because it's going to be where most of the cases will work. And then it'll be DB for short for database, colon, and then make sure you don't have a space, create. So this will go ahead and create our initial databases for us. So go ahead and run this command next. So this will actually create for us two databases, one for development and then one for testing. That way it just separates the data depending on what environment we are using. So we're technically using this one right here of the development database. But that is what it will be created. Sometimes when you are creating a database, it might say that the database is in use or there's already a database with that name. That just means that you have a database with the exact same name. So you're able to go ahead and delete it or override it or call it something else. So that is what you're able to do in that particular case. Go ahead, Daniel.
So after I did that, it told me last login Sunday, November 21st, something like that. It says the default interactive shell is now ZSH. To update your account to ZSH, please run CHSH and then it says some other stuff.
Does it say create database or anything like that?
Nope.
Does it say zish or bash up here?
Yeah, let me just close it real quick and try to see if it works now.
Sounds good.
So it says bash, but it said it was changed to zish. Should I go ahead and run the command again? Would it hurt
Yep.
my code if I run it again? So yeah, I'll run it again.
Yeah.
Okay, just one sec.
Yeah, I usually get the same message when I like quit my terminal or something and reopen it.
Yeah, for
I'm
some
not sure
reason,
if that's what.
yeah, it looks like it. Oh yeah, now it's saying could not locate gem file or bundle directory.
Yeah, you might not be CD'd into the right directory.
Oh right. I think I may have quit out on accident, but I didn't press any commands to quit out. It was kind of weird.
Yeah, so go ahead and CD into it, try that command, and then that should work.
Just okay. All right.
Yep. So that will be the next housekeeping item, is to create an initial database. And this database is only on your local machine. So it is stored within this little elephant here. That's where it's located at. So when you are working with multiple people on the project, they would have their own databases on their own machine for now. I would have my own database on my computer, and then Meg would have her own database on her computer. So all of our data will be a little bit different because of how we are storing the data. later on, once we go into production, we'll be sharing a database on a live server. And that's where we are going to be using that particular place for housing our database. But for now, each of our computers will house our own databases for now. So that's fine for now. And then later on, we can find different ways. The next housekeeping item that we need to do is that we need to grab our code and push it up to GitHub. So we are going to be following the get flow. So if you go back into our get flows here, and then within the get flows, we are going to be doing the initial push here because this is the first time we're pushing it to GitHub. So we're doing the initial push here. The really cool thing is that Rails actually ran this command for us already. So we actually don't need to do the get init command at all because that's already done for us within Rails. But we need to do every other step after that. So let's go ahead and do those steps now. So this one is going to do a get add, and this one will go ahead and track all of the new files and folders that Get hasn't know about yet. So this will track them so Get does know about them. The next command here is going to be what we are going to be labeling those changes. So it will be commit-m, and typically it will be a message saying what it is that you just did. So for us, we just created initial project. Go ahead and press enter. I'm just gonna wait for a bit just because this will produce a lot of output because we are tracking a bunch of stuff. So adding is going to be tracking all of the changes. Committing is going to be labeling what those changes are. So you would need to add and commit when you do want Get to track those changes. So that will produce that little dot on the timeline of your code. And again, the message would change depending on what it is that you're trying to do. Here, we're just creating the initial project. After that, we need to go through the next step here of going into our GitHub and creating a new repository on GitHub. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go into GitHub. You would go ahead and log in if you haven't already. And then over here or over here, depending on where it is you want to create a new repository, it would be this new repository button here. So it's with this little plus sign, new repository, and then that's what we just pressed there. That one will lead you to the same thing too. So then within your repository name, again, it should be the exact same name as your project. So it'll be contact, I think it's contact list. Let me double check real quick. Contact list winter 21. So here it'll be contact list winter 21. Exact same name. For some reason, if you do have the same project name inside of your directory, just add in a little bit more data so it'll be unique to your own GitHub account. But this one should be unique enough. So then let's go ahead and create a repository. We'll leave all of those default settings as is. With the default settings, that will give things into public. And then that will take us here. Go ahead, Freddie.
To do that, we just have to be in GitHub, right? We just do the new repository.
Yep.
And then just make it our file name.
Yep, which is contact list winter 21.
Okay.
It will be the name of your project. Yep. So after that, when you are on this page, you need to grab the SSH. So with the SSH, make sure that the SSH is highlighted and it doesn't look like a URL. If it looks like a URL like this, that's the wrong one. So don't grab this one. That's the wrong one. That will require you to input your username and password every single time that you are doing a get process. So that's why we're using SSH here. So make sure that SSH is highlighted and then copy this line of code. So go ahead and copy that. And then within your terminal, it will be get remote add. The name of the connection will always be call it origin because that is going to be what the repository is going to be called on GitHub. And then we are going to paste what it is that we just copied. So here, even though that I am slacking out my own, make sure that you delete it and post in your own repository. So delete the stars where I say paste your own, and then actually paste in your own SSH. Because it only works for if you have access to it. Since this is on my account, you don't have access to it. So it'll give you a permission denied. So make sure you do it to your GitHub account. So this step here, this will connect your local repository on your machine to the one on GitHub. So this is going to be connecting and anchoring both of those together. So they are now connected with this origin remote here. And then one last final step that we need to do is going to be get push origin master. And with this get push origin master, it is going to push up any new changes with the commits and all of that from your local repository into the repository inside of GitHub. So this will update all of your code from your computer into online inside of GitHub here. So that's what the get push origin master does. So we are pushing to the remote, which is the one on GitHub, and then the master branch, which is the current branch that we are currently in. Okay, and then that will take care of those steps. And then if you refresh this page, so go ahead and refresh it. You can press this, or you can do Command R. That will also refresh the page there. That will have all of your code. So this is what your Rails project would look like. It should look exactly the same as if you were to open it inside of your VS Code here. And just a reminder, when you are turning in your homework, it will be this URL right here. So that URL is what you are turning in for homework, and that will grab all of these files and folders that we are going to be looking at and grading at. Sweet. There is one more housekeeping item, but let me show you where we are currently at inside of the Rails references. Go ahead, Freddie.
So when you're saying that, when you turn in your homework, do you mean like, for when we do like future projects and stuff?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So all of your homework assignments now going forward, you have to submit them through GitHub. Well, we're not going to have it be a zip. So inside of your references is going to be inside of the Rails references now. And we just did these first steps here. This step will make more sense tomorrow, but we basically did this step right here when we created the project. And then initially when we are creating the project, we are going to be adding in our gems. This is the first gem that we add in any additional gem, and we ran a bundle here. After that, we need to go ahead and do any other documentation that it tells us to with our configurations. So for the React Rails gem, we need to run this command right here that will create the components and connect them all together. So that will help us out there. And then we are then creating our initial database. So that is with this command. And then also follow the get flow to push it up into GitHub. So those are the commands that you would need to do just to start off within your project itself. There is one more here, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But those are all of the steps that you would need to follow. So later on, when you are going to be creating the project, you'll be doing the exact same steps that is outlined here. So our final housekeeping item that we need to do is that we need to plan out our database. So whatever it is that we are going to be creating, like whether it's a contact list or a grocery list, etc., we need to plan out what it is that we are storing within the database. And you can do that multiple ways. You can do that with a pen and paper or sticky notes. I have like a pack of sticky notes here. Or you can find some online tools or existing tools that you have on your computer. So let me show you this tool here called Lucidchart. And this is a tool that you might be using in the future for your projects. And this is a tool that you can use for this. So it is a free application that you can use. You just need to create a account. The only limit is that it only limits you to 3 documents that you're able to create. But to be honest, with the stuff that we are creating, we can put them all in one document, and we can go ahead and just section off, or just go ahead and take a picture of the section it is that we want. So 3 documents, even though seems less, we can just put everything in one and then just use that one. So that one is fine. So after you go to that website, you are then going to create a new account if you are going to be using this tool. And then you can go ahead and create a new document or from a template. And I'll show you how a typical one will look like here. So this is what we'll be building out today. And you'll be doing these one per project. And again, if you are using Lucidchart, you can put it all in the same document. Just put it somewhere else within the document so you can outline those. Yeah, here we go. So this here is for our contact list. But if you were to do another one, I would put like the grocery list over here. Things like that, because you can just grab just the first section, etc. Before we get started of what this is, you would need to, if you are using Lucidchart, install additional tools so you can have what you see here. So those additional tools is going to be, let me hide the videos real quick. It's going to be the plus shape here. So if you do plus shapes, and this will give you a bunch of other shapes that you can use for your diagrams and all of the other things that you can build. So this is mostly going to be building out diagrams and pictures. The one that we are going to be using is called entity relationships. So have that be checked off, and that will go ahead and install that particular shapes that we would need. So that would be entity relationships. And for the other ones, you can install them if you do need them. But the main ones that we'll be using, especially for this lecture, is going to be entity relationships. And that will give you this section right here. So you can go ahead and drag and drop those tables over on this side. So this table right here is technically the second one right where I have it here. So each of the tables that we have, or entity, that is going to be representing a object that we are going to be storing within our database. So we are going to have a bunch of objects, and that will be represented each by the table. So this is where SQL will be connected to, is the individual tables with rows and columns, right? So each of these are going to be the tables, and then there will be rows of data, and then these are the individual columns for each of the tables. So the columns, you can think of it as what the table has or what the object has. So let's go into this project here. And typically you would just do one step at a time, and then we can branch off out of there. So the first table that we are going to be storing is going to be called the contacts table. Right, so that will be the contacts. Since we're doing a contact list, like your phone's contact list, we're going to store a bunch of contacts within the contact table. So we'll be going ahead and having it be the first name, the phone, the age, and the email. And those are the fields that we need to have for the contact for it to make sense within our application. What Rails does for us is that it gives us a primary key of the ID, and then 2 timestamps, one of create at and one called updated at. So those are already given regardless of what table it is that you are creating. These 3 fields will show up on all of your tables. So you don't actually need to plan out for the ID. It does that for you, which is pretty cool. But all of the other fields, you would need to go ahead and plan that out, as well as their data type. So whether it's a string or integer or a float or a Boolean, you would also need to plan out those fields as well. You don't need to copy what you see here. I'll send this out a little bit later on. Go ahead, Freddie.
Sorry, you just answered my question.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, we'll be changing this and I'll send out the final one after we finish those changes. But yeah, so that is what you are going to be planning is that you'll be dragging and dropping some tables in and then see what fields it is that you have for that object. So for example, if you were to do this for the grocery list, so a grocery item would be a particular table. And then the item will have like the item name, the item price, the item inventory, and then what data types each of those fields have. So that's one of the things that you would need to think about is those different objects that you'll be dealing with within your project. So in our case, we're doing a contact list. It'll be these fields for our contacts. These fields here, we'll be adding them later on because I want to show you how to change things. If you already created a particular table, I'm going to show you how it's going to be changed for those particular table. If you do good planning, you don't need to do that step, but I know things does happen and you might forget some fields like last name or friend. You can add that later and I'll show you how to do that within your code. So you would go ahead and rinse and repeat that process for all of your tables. So for example, there's also another table of address. So the address has state, city, zip. And then if there are any relationships, so if one data relates to another piece of data, then you need to figure out the associations. And we'll go into associations a little bit later on, but it will be how it is related to the other type of object. So for example, how is address related to the contact? So here, the address belongs to a particular contact, and the contact only has a single address, right? So that is the type of relationship that it has, is that it goes, it belongs to and has one. And again, we'll talk about the different types of relationships in a sec, but that's also something that you would do here as well. And then you would go ahead and draw arrows to make sure that those are all clear cuts and then specify the relationships. And then you would also need to specify if there is a foreign key or not. Because the relationship, because this address belongs to the contact, I need to have the contact ID. So I need to include that the parent of this particular table would be somewhere. So that's something to keep in mind, is that if you do have any children data, you need to specify who the parent is within the children's table. So that would be the same for notes and the address. They would both belong to the contact. So they both need the contact ID. And then here for the comment, like if you're just making a side comment of sort, and we're storing that, that would belong to the parent here, which is going to be no. So again, you would go ahead and take a look at the relationships, and we'll talk about that in a sec. So we'll come back to that idea. Let's just focus on this part first of how we can create at least these 4 items first. And then we'll find out how to change them. And then we can add in these other fields as well. So again, don't worry too much about the ID created and updated at. Those are already given from Rails. I just put them here so you can kind of see them, but those are already done for you. You just need to worry about the other fields and data types for them. So to put this into play, after you are done planning along, you would then go ahead and start off within the models. So let me show you the model portion right here. So regardless of where it is that you're starting, I would typically start off with the models because that is what is going to be defining the objects it is that you are using within your applications. So this is where you are defining your objects, is going to be inside of the model portion. So this will represent a particular table within the database. So we'll have multiple models within our project. And each of the models will go ahead and associate with a particular table within the database here. So that is how it will be connected, is that it will be associated with a particular table within the database, and then we're able to do other things as well, and I'll show you that. So let's go ahead and create the model. Let me do this step first, And then I'll show you what happens if you do mess up, and then we'll actually do it the right way. So this is the wrong way of creating the model in a sense. So if you were to create a model, again, this would be not the correct way. And let me kind of show you why. So if I were to create a model this way of bundle exec rails G model, your model name is going to be singular. So model name is going to be singular. So here it'll be contact singular. So your models are going to be singular. Tomorrow, your controller is going to be plural. So later on, when we go into controllers, they would be plural. But if you press enter at this step, you actually created the model incorrectly. And let me kind of show you why. Because right now, what you just did, if you did press enter here, is that you created an empty table. So all this did, and I'll show you this more in depth in a sec, is that it creates a table called contacts, and that's it. And then you have to do additional work for you to add in each of those fields. So that's why it will be a lot more better for you to specify the fields when you create the models there. So if you ever mess up within the model process, let me show you what that command is. Because again, sometimes you might forget and you might put a S here of contacts, even though it's a model, you would need to delete that model. So to delete the model is very easy. I would just go to the last command, and instead of generate, we are going to be doing a D. So again, if you ever mess up, like what we did here of creating an empty table, or if you like did a typo, or if you accidentally add in an S or whatever it is, you need to delete the model. You can't just make those changes within the code because Rails, it doesn't translate that fully over. So that's why we need to delete the model. So anytime that you see a G, you can switch it over to D for delete. And that will delete all of the content that it created. So the migration file, the models, and everything like that. So again, if you ever need to delete a model, it's with the D command. So let me show you how to create the model the correct way. So let me just do this part here. So to create the model, and this is where you will be typing this out, is that it would be bundle exec rails G. We are creating a model, and then this could be lowercase or uppercase. It doesn't matter. I typically do it uppercase just so it makes sense. And again, your models are going to be singular. So models is going to be singular. So that's why this one is called contact. And then afterwards, we are going to specify each of the fields. So the contact has a name, colon, string. So make sure that there's no spaces between the colons and the field as well as their data type, or else it will think it is multiple, it'll be multiple fields there. And then let's go ahead and add in those other ones of age, integer, and then it would be phone. We'll just have that just be a string for now. Technically, it could be an integer, I guess, but we'll just have it be a string. And then email would also be a type of string. And then if this is a child model, then you would need to go ahead and add in who the parent is. But since this isn't one, then you are going to be leaving it as is, and you can press enter here. So go ahead and run this command inside of your terminal. So this will go ahead and create a model as well as a migration. And we'll talk about what each of those are in a sec. And again, if you ever did mess up, even at this step here, like let's just say I mistyped email or even did a S here, go ahead and just redo the command with the D, right? So that will delete it and then regenerate it with those correct changes. So delete the S and make sure everything looks the right thing and everything like that. So that's what the generating and deleting a model. So that's how you create models. This is what this Rails G command, the name of the model is singular, and in any fields, which is what we specified here. So those are the columns that we have for our individual table when we plan things out. And then over here, if it is a child model, then we need to specify who the parent is. But again, this is the parent, so we don't need to do that here. So here it actually generates a few stuff for us. Again, anything with testing you can ignore. We're not going to do any testing within our course. But here, this is the two files of what it is that we are going to be looking at. It's the model as well as the migrate file, the migration file. Go ahead, Danny. With a Y.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, so on that file it created, it has that long string of numbers at the beginning instead of just context. What are those string of numbers?
Yep, let's go ahead and take a look at that because that is our next thing.
Oh, my bad, sorry.
No, you're good. So that will be, let me close everything so you can see what I see. Again, to close everything as well as the files, this will close all of the editors and this here will collapse all of the folders. So that is a good shortcut to kind of clean things up so you're not fumbling around in a bunch of files and folders. So the first place that we need to check is within the DB folder, and that is generates a new folder called the migrate folder. So migrate or migrations are going to be these individual files here, and these are just sets of instructions to be applied into the database. So each of these files, we'll have a bunch of them in a sec. For now, we only have one. Each of these are just sets of instructions that are going to be applied into the database. So this one will come with a few things. The first thing is going to be what it's going to be doing. So here it's going to be creating the contacts table, and then it's followed by a timestamp. So right here, all of these numbers is going to be when it is that you created this migration. So that's basically giving you the day and time of when you ran this command here. Not that one, the one that we did up here actually. So that will save the time and day of where it is that you ran that command. And then all this is saying that is in the year 2021, it's in December. I think my computer thinks it's the 24th. So that might be incorrect. And then this here around here is going to be how we distinguish the time. But that is fine for now. We don't need to worry too much about that. The more important thing is going to be the content of the file. So every single time that you are creating a model, make sure that you are double checking in the migration file to make sure everything is good. Because again, if there is some typos or anything like that, you would need to delete the model and then regenerate it with the right fields. So what you are looking for is that inside of this block of code, make sure that this one here is going to be plural. And then all of the other ones here are the right fields and the right data type. The reason why this is plural is that within SQL and databases, your table is going to be plural. So your models are always going to be singular, and your database tables and controllers, they will be plural. So that's okay that this is plural here. The other thing is that these are the individual fields that we are going to have. So the contact will have a name, the age, the phone, and the email. So name, phone, age, and email. And over here, that is going to be specifying each of their data type. And this is something extra, and that will generate the ID as well as the additional timestamps of what it is that it's doing. So that is the instructions that are going to be applied to the database. Something up here is that right here, we are using a class in a sense within Rails, and Rails is going to have a bunch of classes and some modules here and there. And here, this is going to be inheriting for something called active record. So this is using active record for when we are doing things. So essentially what active record is, and you're more than welcome to Google this a little bit later on if you want a more precise definition, but it is the Rails way for us to do anything with a database. So Rails will give us active record commands, and each of those commands, they will do something within the database. It will then later on translate into SQL and then be applied into the database here. So even though that this is written in Ruby, later on when it transcribes into active record and then translates into SQL, it then will be understood within SQL and knows what to do. So that's the really cool part, is that we can not write really complex SQL queries. We can just write just regular Ruby, and that will do things like normal. So that is a migration files, and we'll have multiple of them. This is going to be the first one. So once your migration file looks all good to go, like this one right here, if yours look a little bit different, or if yours doesn't look like this, I would go ahead and delete it. Again, to delete it, just do the up arrow and do the D instead of the G. So D to delete it instead of the G, and then you are going to regenerate it. So do this command again, but make sure you have all of the fields correctly spelled, or if you need to make changes, that would be inside of here. So the next step that we are going to be doing, and you will do this step multiple times, it's going to be a Rails command of db migrate. Rails command of db migrate. So what this will do is that anytime that you are creating a new migration, those creates new sets of instructions for the database. What db migrate does is that it will go inside of your migrate folder and it will apply those instructions into the database. So it will take this here and apply it into the database. So any new migrations that you have, it will add it into the database. So even though that later on I'll run this again, it won't rerun this code again because I already ran that. It's smart enough to know that it is going to be doing the next new changes or the next new sets of instructions. So that's the migrate command. And again, you only need to run this command anytime that you have a new migrate folder. So anytime that you have a new one of these files, you need to run this command right here. And in that will go ahead and create for us a schema. A schema is a pre-generated file. So this is something that Rails creates for you when you ran that migrate command. And essentially what a schema is, this is technically the long definition of it, but this is going to be a schematic of what it ran inside of the database. So this ran these steps within your database. And it added in 2 additional fields, and it also adds in the ID. So this is kind of like the receipt of what it just did within your database in a sense. Okay, let's go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back from break, we'll talk a little bit more about this process some more, and then what happens when we mess up and how we get to the database and everything like that. So we'll come back to this step here. So let's take a quick break and we'll come back at 7:15. Okay, let's go ahead and pick up where we left off. So before the break, we went into the migrations. And again, what the migrations are is that they're sets of instructions to be applied into the database. And then we're able to apply those to the database once we run a db migrate. So we typically would run this command every time that we have a new migration file. So anytime that we have a new file within this folder, we would run that command there. That will in turn go ahead and produce a schema file. And that schema file is going to be a file that is going to be updating every time that we do a migrate. This will go ahead and kind of print out what it just did within it. So it's very similar to like a gemlock file of like a receipt of everything that it created. That's what the schema is. And the schema is also really good to look at for all of the different fields that you are going to be doing. This is just good to know. You won't be doing this as often, but if you want to undo a migration, it'll be db rollback. Don't do this command. This is just for your information like so. That's how you would undo the previous migration there. So we won't be doing that since I do need that for this next part. So let me go ahead and show you where that section is. We'll talk about that later. So right here inside of the Rails models, this is what we just talked about. Is that when we are generating a model, that is a Rails G command model, the model name, and each attribute, as well as their data type, one at a time. And again, make sure that your models are going to be singular, because models are singular, your controllers are plural. And if it does have a particular parent, it will follow this pattern right here. I'll show you this a little bit later when we create another model, but that is what we would need to add in addition to everything else that we have there. And then if you ever do mess up, you will go ahead and delete it like so, and that will go ahead and help out with that deletion. And then this is how we are going to be running the sets of instructions and applying those to the database. So that is this section right here of the Rails models. We'll go into this real quick in a sec. So I'll come back to this step here. So again, the database commands for now is going to be create, migrate, and then there's also additional ones that we'll talk about. Here's the rollback one. And then we'll be jumping into here for a sec. So we'll talk about those next. So for this next part, you don't need to follow along because this is what we'll be doing more tomorrow. So a lot of stuff that we'll be talking about today will apply more tomorrow. So this will make more sense more tomorrow than if we were to do it this way. So what we are going to do is that we are going to go into our database, and you can actually do that with the railc command. Again, don't follow these next steps. I'll just do it real quick so you can kind of see what's in here. So C is short for console, and the console is going to be a IRB session within our development database. So this will give us the ability to run Ruby and to give us access to our database through active record within Rails. So Ruby commands does technically work here, as well as Ruby logic does work here. But if you want to do anything with the database, you have to use active record. And I'll just show you the most common active records just because we'll be using them more tomorrow. So I'll show you some of them today, and then again, I'll apply them a little bit later on for tomorrow. So to create a individual object, you are going to be needing the name of the individual model, which in this case is going to be contact, and then .create. And that's the active record of creating a additional record within the database. And you need to pass in those fields accordingly. So for example, the contact has a name, I'll just do this, age, I'll just do this real quick. Elsa has a phone. And then email. And then each of these are going to be key value pairs. Oh no, I messed up. There we go. Followed by a comma for each of those fields. So this one will be asdf@email.com. And also when you are doing it in here, just be careful. That's why we don't do it in here. You need to make sure that you have all of those like opening and closing parentheses and curly braces and all that. So that's how you are going to create an object within the active record. It's going to be using the create here. So the active record will then go ahead and translate into SQL, which is this command right here, and it will apply that to the database. And it will return for us this object here of the contact it is that we are having here. So that's how we're able to create objects within our Rails project, is with the .create here. So we'll be doing this more tomorrow within our controllers. Again, this is another way that you can do things, but it will make a lot more sense more tomorrow because that's where we will actually be doing this stuff. Let me add in a few more just so we can have different data so we can look at. So let me change this to be Bob, and then this will be like so. I'll change these fields a bit. Oh, sorry, that's the phone number, huh? I'll just do this. And this will be bob@email.com. So that will create another record for the contact of Bob. So that's that one there. And then let me do one more. I'll do one for Jill. I don't know why, but it also adds in these things, which is the delete button or the arrow key. But if you type it in, it will disappear, I guess. So I'll do Jill here. Sure, Jill is 41. And then Jill here. Okay. So technically I should have 3 records that has the individual contacts for each of them. I'm actually going to create this one twice, but with different age, slightly different phone number, and a different name, just for example purposes of what I'm doing next. Okay, so I should have 4 contacts within my database. But again, we won't be doing it inside of our terminal. We'll be doing it more in our controllers. So if we want to find a additional record, we are going to be doing the dot find. So it'll be the name of the model and then dot find. And then what you are going to be finding it by is going to be the unique identifier. So that is the ID here, because the ID is going to be our primary key. And that is going to be our unique identifier that we'll be finding stuff. So what that will give us is that it'll go ahead and translate this into a SQL query of select contacts from contact, where the contact ID is equal to 1. So that's what this does. And here is that individual object that has the ID of 1. So how this will be used a little bit later on within our controller is that instead of specifying whether it's contact of 1 or 2, etc., because we don't know the individual ID, we are going to do something called params : ID. This won't work here because it will work more in the controller. But this, when we put it in the controller, we can pass in the ID of whatever ID of the contact it is that we are grabbing. And that will grab the ID it is for that contact, and it will display that contact. So that's how this one will be applied later on. So we'll be doing it a little bit differently. But if I do press enter, it just gives me an error because it doesn't know what params are. Another way that you can find stuff, and this is a different way, is that you can find it by something else other than the ID. So if that's the case, you can do like a find by here. And that would be like a find by the name of Jill. And this is case sensitive, I believe. So it will go ahead and grab each of those values with the people name of Jill. But in this particular case, I do have multiple Jills within my database. And this might be the same for other databases as well. But what the find by does is that it will only include the first Jill that it finds that meets this requirement. So that's why here I do have a single Jill with the ID of 3. But if I want to find all of the Jills within my database, instead of like just the first one, it'll be the same thing, but instead of find by, it'll be dot where. So where here. So that will give me a better condition. So in SQL, that'll be where the contact's name equals Jill. And that will give us an array of all of the people that match with that condition there. So this will give me all of the individual Jills within my database. Was that a hand somewhere?
Yeah, I had a quick question.
Yep.
So is there a benefit to using this contact out where and extracting information that way, or over say like running and trying to do it by SQL or writing a query?
Yeah, so we inside of Rails, we'll be actually writing it this way here, because Ruby doesn't you'll get a syntax error because Ruby and SQL, they're 2 different things. So this will actually go ahead and translate into SQL later on, which is this line right here.
Gotcha.
So it's basically doing everything that it is within SQL, but it does it in a Rails way.
I see. Okay.
Yep, that's a good question. But yeah, everything that you're able to do in SQL, you're able to also do in Active Record. So if you have like a more precise query, like let's say that where the name equals to Jill, you can also like order them as well. You can do that too. So you would just have to look it up what it is in Active Record. I think order is just dot order, and then I'll order them by the age. And this is alphanumeric. So that way you'll get this jail because she is younger, and then it will print out this jail here. So that active record will then go ahead and translate to SQL of selecting all of the contacts where the name equals to Jill, and then it does like an order by the age ascending. Go ahead, Freddie.
We're just watching you do this to try to understand it more, right?
Yep.
Okay, just want to make sure. Thank you.
The other thing that we'll be doing a lot inside of our controller is going to be this next command here. And that will be contact.all. And you've probably seen this yesterday when we did our index for our list. But what contact.all does is that it is the active record equivalence of selecting star from contacts. So that will grab all of the contacts from the contacts table. So that'll be this here. We have our first one, second one, third one, etc. So that will grab all of our contacts within our database and put them into an array of objects. So this here is the array. It's a little bit hard to see here. That's where it starts over here. That's where it ends. And each of these things are an object. It's formatted a little bit differently because we're in the database. But yeah, so that will give us a bunch of information of all of the contacts. And we would typically do this inside of our individual database there when we are doing our index action. A few other ones that is going to look weird is going to be when we are doing a new versus a create. Let me show you what I mean by that. I am going to create a new contact, but I'll just do it this way for now. And then you'll kind of see a little bit of difference from this way versus the other way. So I am going to create a contact called Katie, and I'm going to set that to a variable for now, so I can reference it a little bit later on within my code. But in this case, instead of me doing a dot create, I'm doing a dot new here. And then I can pass in different fields. So I'll do Katie, and then we also would have an age. Sure. So what this will do, where is it here, is that this actually doesn't do a create. So when you are doing a dot new, it creates it in memory. So it only creates it within memory itself. So if I do a contact.all again, you don't see Katie here because that's not technically created within our database. So that's what the dot new does, is that it only creates it only in memory, only in like a separate place for us to go ahead and keep that information. So the reason why we are doing it this way is that when we are creating a form for the user to input data, we need to do a dot new because we're not going to save all of their information yet until they hit the submit button. So that's what the dot new does, is that it can save whatever the user types in, and they could change it, or they could delete some stuff and re-add it on, and it will still store it within memory. It's not until they hit submit, that's when we actually save that object. So now if we go ahead and do a katie.save, for example, that will go ahead and insert into our contacts table. So now if I do a contact.all, Katie is now inside of my database. So it's a two-step process here. So we're not totally creating when we are doing a create, we are doing a new instance of one here first, and then they can change it, they can manipulate it however it is they want. But as soon as they press create, it will go ahead and save that data, and then it will add it into the database. So that's what we'll be doing for the creation within our controller, is doing it with a dot new. And something else I did on purpose is that if you are forgetting some fields, like right here, when I added the fields for Katie, I only added the name and the age. So everything else, I'll move this a bit. Everything else, like the phone and the email and everything like that, that will be all nil. So by default, if you don't pass in anything, that is nil. The only exception to that is that if you do set up database constraints of if this is a require field and this is a require field, that means that Katie cannot be created until she fills out her email or gives her phone number. So those are going to be database constraints that we can specify. And you can do that within the migration files as well. It's just additional fields that you would add, like default to be true if it's a Boolean, and then null is false, things like that. But for now, we'll just leave it as is, and we can just stick to that. So that will handle the create CRUD action and the select. We'll do the other one is going to be update, and then we'll do a destroy. And that will handle all the CRUD actions that you would need to know. And again, this will make a lot more sense tomorrow when we actually put these items inside of our controller. So to update an individual value, let's go ahead and do a contact.update. And then that needs two things. The first thing is going to be the ID. I think Katie has an ID of 5. Let me double check. Yep, ID of 5. And then what it is that you want to update. I want to update the phone. Phone is like this to be this. So that's one way that you are going to be updating this particular field here. But how we will be doing things is that we will go ahead and also pass in the ID a different way, because again, we're being more generic. And instead, what we are going to do is that we'll go ahead and pass in the params ID, because it doesn't matter if the ID is 1, 2, etc. Whatever ID is coming in, we are updating that object. That's what this means. Again, this will make a lot more sense in the controller. And then over here, we're not specifying a single field. We're just going to be passing in like a whole entire object. So that will be where our object params are. It'll be contact params. So that's where we are specifying that if you do pass in the title and the age, etc., that will also be permitted and what will be updated. So that's how we'll be doing things in the controller. The last one is going to be destroy. And again, with update and destroy, make sure that you are passing in an ID, because if you don't pass in an ID, you could potentially update every single record, and you could also delete every single record. So that's why be careful with some of these. You are able to change your database really quickly with just one command. So what we are going to do is that if we are going to destroy, we are going to find it by the ID first. So we need to find it by the ID. Let's just say 1, for example, and that will give us a particular object back. And all it needs is that it just needs a dot destroy, and that will go ahead and delete that. So it does a delete SQL query. So that will go ahead and do a delete SQL query there. And that's how it is that we will be deleting stuff, is with the dot destroy after we find a particular contact. And again, to find a particular contact, we're not going to pass in like a set in stone value. We're going to do a params ID here. So just take in any ID that the user passes in. So whether it's 1 or 2 or 3, it will go ahead and grab it, and then it will destroy it. But yeah, so that is what we are going to be doing more tomorrow with the controllers, is that we'll be doing active record commands, and that will apply into our database. So technically, we could also do it here as well, but that's not the best practice way, just because, again, we're going to be utilizing the website to go ahead, and when we press a button, that will go ahead and delete the contact. Or when we submit a form, that will create a contact. So we're not going to be doing it here within the terminal. So if you want to get out of your console, it will be with the exit, and that will take you back into your own item here. So yeah, so all that will make a little bit more sense more tomorrow, where we'll be adding those active record commands into our controller. Okay, so for this next thing, let's say that we want to add in additional fields for our existing contacts table. So if that's the case, I need to make a few changes, right? So if you want to make a few changes, I'll show you how to do that. So the first change that I want to make is that I want to change name into first name. So right now it's just very generic. It just says name here. I want to have it say first name. If I want to make that change, I need to do another migration. So I need to make another migration here, and that will create that change there. So let me show you how to do that. And this is where you are going to be following along. So to create a migration, it will be following this command here of Rails G migration, because we are generating a migration. And you are going to be specifying what it is that you are doing. They're going to be connected by underscores. So it'll be change name to first name. So be very specific with the migrations. So when other developers, they take a look at it, they know exactly what it is that this migration is doing. So go ahead and run this command. I'll select this out real quick. And this will create a new migration file. We are going to fill out that file. And depending on what it is that you are doing, you need to create a migration for that. So any changes that you want to do within your database or within your table, you need to do it via migrations. So here within that particular file that it created, so it's inside of DB migrate the timestamp, and it should say change first name to last name. This is what you'll be putting inside of here, and I'll copy and paste this over, and I'll explain what it is that I am bringing over. Yeah, right here. So again, this is inside of your DB migrate, and it's your newest migration file, which is most likely the bottom one. And then within that file, inside of the change here, make sure that you add in these things here, but your whole file should look like this. So the top stuff on line 3, that's just notes, and I'll explain that in a sec. So depending on what it is that you're trying to do with your database, make sure that you do look it up. So go ahead and just Google how to make a migration to change a column name, or how to make a migration to change a data type. So each of these things inside of the change, that would differ depending on what it is that you're trying to do. So here inside of here, what we are doing is that we're renaming a column. So that's the active record to rename a column, and it's inside of the table of contacts. And this is the old column of what it was named, and this is going to be its new name, which is first name here. So this is how you're able to rename a column. So with this particular field here. So once you go ahead and have that, make sure that is saved. And again, anytime that you have a new migration, we need to run a command. And that is the migrate command. So that will be bundle exec Rails, or you can use rake db migrate. So that will take those sets of instructions and go ahead and apply those into those database. Give me 1 sec. I made a typo in one of the messages real quick. There we go. So migrate will go ahead and it will grab all those changes, those new changes, and apply them to the database. And then just to prove it for you all, inside of the schema, now the name is now renamed first name here. So it did apply those changes. So that's what happens when you need to rename a particular field. It's how you would do it that way. But what happens if I want to add in additional fields? So if that's the case, you would need to do another migration. So let's go back to our chart. Let's say that I do need my last name and my friend here as well. And last name is going to be a string, friend is going to be a Boolean. So what do I do when I do need to add in additional fields within my table here? Because right now, it doesn't have that. It doesn't have last name, or it doesn't have friend. So let's go ahead and add those in with a migration. So to do that is going to be another Rails G migration command. And then again, you need to be specific of what it is that you're doing. So we add last name. Yeah, I think that's his last name. And friend to, and this last part is important because it specifies where it is located at. So this is to the contacts table. So this will go ahead and write out that migrations ourselves. And the other one is what fields it will take. So last name is going to be a string, and then friend is going to be a Boolean. So with this type of migration, it actually pre-populates and fills out the migration file for you. And I'll show you that after I select this out. So that will go ahead and create this other migration file. But in this particular case, it already fills it out for you because of the way that we are writing our migrations. So that will help us out with that. So we don't need to do anything else with here. It's just double check, make sure everything is all good. So now that we have a new migration, let's go ahead and run that other command again, which is the Rails DB migrate. So if any of us say, go ahead and migrate your database, this is the command that you are going to be doing. And that's how you are going to be adding in new fields is what we did up here of adding the migrations of where it is located at. So whatever the table name is, and then the fields and their data types. So now if we go into our schema, we now have last name and friend here, which is what we need. Inside of your database, if you were to take a look at all of our contacts again within the database, they don't have a last name, so that will default to nil, and then the friend would also default to nil or false. So if you don't have any additional fields, all of the data that doesn't have that field, they would be defaulted to nil or the equivalents of nil, like 0 or false. Go ahead, James.
A quick question. So I was trying to rename to name to first name.
Mhm.
That whole process, it didn't work for me. And I think it may have been because I forgot to save the schema or the file before I ran the migrate command. So if that happens, would it just be a matter of repeating the exec Rails generate migration change name to first name, like do that process again?
You already have this file and the content within this file, right?
I do, yeah. So I have that. I had that file. It's just not reflecting in the schema.
Yeah, so go ahead and save it. And then once you save it, you can just do a migrate, and then that will go ahead and apply those changes. And then now if you, after that is done, when you check your schema, that should then be called first name now.
Yeah, I tried that a couple of times, including just this last one, and it didn't work.
Does it give you back any feedback or errors or anything?
It does not. Let me just try running the bundle exec Rails DB migrate one more time.
Okay.
All it did was it gave me running via Spring Loader and process 43962, and then it just went to the next cursor.
Yeah, we might double check that inside of the break.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
But yeah, see if the migrate works. If it doesn't, double check your schema, double check these files here. And that should be it for now. And then if that still doesn't work, we'll help you out during the break. Sweet. But yeah, so if you do need to do any changes, you would need to do that with migrations. So let me show you where that is inside of the code. So here, if you were to do the migrations, that will follow these migration steps here. And then again, make sure you Google this because different migrations will look differently. So there's not like a one-stop shop for migrations. So follow that documentation or how the Google is doing it, and then do it that way for that particular migrations. Because here within, when we change the first name, we do have to manually put stuff in, but here Rails handles that for us. So there might be a easier or harder solution depending on what it is that you're trying to do. After you go ahead and do that, you are then going to go ahead and run that migration. And after you run the migration, it will then update the schema to those changes that you have. So that's migrations. It's just additional changes or instructions you want to have applied to the database. I'll talk about this in a sec because this doesn't make sense right now. So the next part that we are going to be doing is that it would be more inside of the model itself. So here, this has to do everything within the database, and the model is going to reflect on that, and it actually leads into the database. So we'll just do whatever we need to with the migrations here. One other file that we will get into a lot later is called the seeds file. So this is the file that will give you access to have pre-populated data. So if I want to create a bunch of contacts here, I can go ahead and do like a 5 times do loop and just do like contact dot create, and then just create like 5 contacts named Bob or something, and then etc. So that's what the seeds file is that you can go ahead and pre-populate your data within the seeds file. We'll go into this a little bit more, just because we shouldn't be manually displaying each of those fields, just because that will give you duplicate data. So if I were to go ahead and run this, this will create a bunch of contact named Bob. And that's not really ideal or realistic, right? You don't have a bunch of Bobs in your database. So we'll find and figure out ways to make the data within our database more realistic. But that's the seeds file, is that it will go ahead and pre-populate your data for you. And then to run the seeds file, it's going to be with this db command, and that is down here. That is what this db seeds command here to run this file, like so. But yeah, well, I'll show you a better way of filling out the seeds file. So let's go ahead and collapse everything for now. And what we are going to do for the rest of the night is going to be inside of this particular folder of the app folder, models, and then the contact model. So this is going to be your model. So this is where we are going to be defining a few things. So we'll go into this more after the break. So the first thing that we are going to be talking about are associations. So associations, we'll also be talking about validations. And then some methods. So other methods that we are going to be using. And then the last thing that we are going to do inside of here is going to be callbacks. And that kind of ties into methods, but I'll put that as a separate one called callbacks. And we'll go through each one of these one by one and what they mean. But that will all be within the particular contact here. So you can go ahead and save this as notes for now. And then when we come back from break, we'll break up each of those and define what each of those are, and then what we are going to be putting in each of those sections, and what we are going to be choosing out of those sections there. So let's take our final break for the night, and we'll come back at 8:05. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap up models. And we only have this section to go, and then that's probably all you need to know about models. So now we are going to be inside of app models, then in the individual model file itself. So this one will be called contact.rb. And then you'll have, again, multiple models as we go on by. So this is our first one here. And essentially what we do inside of these models is going to be specifying these 4 things here of associations, validations, other methods, and also callbacks, which kind of leads into methods, and we'll talk about what each of those are. So now let's just go through section by section, specify what different types of associations and validations and stuff, and then what we are going to be putting for this one here. So essentially how association works is kind of very similar of how the word sounds as well, is that it is going to be associating to other models. So it's going to be the relationship to other models. And we need to specify the relationship in the database as well as inside of the models here. Let me show you each of the relationships that there are available within the model here. So we have the belongs to, we have the has many. This one is a very common one. And then has one. And then we have more advanced stuff. And then this would be like a has many through. And then there's also like a has one through, and then it goes even more advanced with that as well. But we won't go too much into that. The only one that we'll go into more is the has many through here. And then for these ones below, we can add in something called dependent. So dependent is based off of a particular action. So we typically would do a dependent here for either has many, has one, or has many here when we are specifying like dependent, destroy, or only do it for when you are going to be having a dependency. So I'll give you an example of that. That should make a little bit more sense. So for each of these associations, you only need to have one for the parent and one for the child models. So each of these will have one for the parent and one for the child. So the belongs to is going to be specifying who the parent is. So that's what the belongs to is. So it typically would go into the child model. The has one, has many, and the has many through, that would be inside of the parent model. And this will specify who the children's are. So who the children's children model are. And then the dependent is just a needed option. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So right now, these association doesn't make not a lot of sense because we only have one table and one object that we're dealing with, and that's the contact object. So let me add in a whole nother table, and then we can see how association will come into play. So I'll comment this out. I'll do a little bit more, and then I'll Slack this whole thing. So give me 1 sec. We'll do this next step together, and then we'll add on to the notes here. So inside of our terminal, let's create a whole nother model, but this time let's have it related to our contacts model. So this is where our planning will come into play. Let's go ahead and create a notes model right here. So within the notes, it will just have a body and it will belong into the individual contact. So each contact will have a note, like let's just say that that note is this person is not available on a Tuesday, so don't call them on a Tuesday. That's the note that we are going to be specifying. So let's go ahead and generate that. And we'll see how that part is. So in that case, let's go ahead and generate a whole new model. And then it'll be a slight difference because this model does have a relationship with another model. So let me show you how that is. So to create a model, again, it's with the bundle exec Rails G command, and we are generating a model, and the models are going to be called note, and it's note singular because models are singular, controllers are plural. and then all of the fields that the note would need. So this one will be type text. Text is a slightly bigger string, so that's why we are doing text here, so it can hold more characters. And then here we need to specify who the parent is. And this is a very important step, because if you don't add this step, there is not going to be a relationship within the database. So even if you did define the relationship in the model, it doesn't reflect that relationship in the database. So this one will connect it also in the database. So this will be contact, and make sure it's lowercase because casing does matter here, colon belongs to. So this specifies who the parent is. So go ahead and run this command here. So in this case, if you want to think about inheritance, that was one of the topics we talked about last week. You can think about the parent being the contact, the child being nodes. So everything the parent has, the child also has. So that's what we are trying to do here, is that with that relationship, the parent is going to be contact belongs to. So I can grab in all of the parent's information, their ID, everything like that. And then what command do we run when we have a new migration file? Does anyone remember?
Migrate.
Is it
Yeah,
DB
it's-
migrate?
It's going to be a DB migrate. And you can also look at your migration file to make sure everything's all there. And again, if there is some like something that looks off, just change this to a D, delete it, and then regenerate it the right way. So let's go ahead and do a migrate. So it'll be bundle exec rails DB correctly, DB migrate. So go ahead and run this command. So this will, again, apply all of those new changes into our database. So this will create a whole new model, and that will then create a whole new table of notes. And notes has a body field, and it also has a foreign key constraint for the individual parent, which is the contact here. So that will connect it in the database. So that will establish the inheritance inside of the database. So that's why inside of the schema, you see another one here of the contact ID, but you also see something here of the foreign key. So this foreign key is what is going to be connecting them in the database. So we need to do that here. And now this will make a lot more sense now that we have two different ones. Inside of our individual models of our nodes and our contacts, now we need to specify the relationship, but within our models now. So inside of our app models notes.rb, there's already a established association here. So again, when we are doing a belongs to, that is who the parent is. And typically this would be in a child model. And this is already done for you because we specify that inside of this line of contact belongs to. So that will go ahead and say that the contact is going to be the parent. So the association inside of this particular model is already done. I just need to specify what the relationship from contact to note is. So here, from contact to note is a has many. And here's how you would decide. So it's either a has many or a has one. In most cases, it's going to be a has many because you will have multiple records of that. If it makes more sense to do a has one, like that person only has a single address, then you can do a has one. But in most cases, you would always do a has many. We'll talk about has many throughs a little bit later next week because that is a special kind of association. So this should make sense when you say it out loud. So here, the note belongs to the contact and the contact has many notes. So note belongs to a contact and then contact has many notes. So that's how it is, the association from contact to note here. So here, let's go ahead and if we were to fill out the association for this, this will be a has many and then notes. And it is plural here because it's a has many. For example, if we were only doing a has one, then it'll be a singular note. So depending on if you are doing a has many or has one, that will be either singular or plural because of having many is multiple and having one is just singular, right? So that should also make sense in English as well. So that's why here the association is contact has many notes, plural. And then the note belongs to the contact. There is one more thing that we need to add, and this doesn't make sense quite yet until we do a few things later on. But we need to add in a additional field of dependent. So this would be dependent destroy. And we'll just get into good practice of what this is. Make sure you do destroy, not destroy. I do that typo all the time, but yeah, it is going to be destroy here. What this does is that when we are establishing a relationship between a parent and child, we also need to include that relationship for what happens when we delete that parent. So if we don't have this, if we were to delete a contact, actually, let me back up a bit. Let's use a example. Let's say that you are going to be moving outside of your house, for example. So let's say that you are moving outside of your house and you are going to be deleting that whole property, demoing out everything within that house. But if I don't have this line of code right here, what that will do is that it will demo the house, but all of the stuff within the house, it will be intact, right? So all of like your furniture and everything like that, that would still be there. And that's what's going to happen inside of your database is that when you do delete a parent, it just deletes that single parent object. What we want to have happen is that when we delete a house, we also want everything inside of the house also to be deleted as well. So when I delete a house, it should delete all of the furniture and everything that is associated to that house. So that's what we are going to be doing here with this line of code is that when the parent is deleted, you are also deleting all of his children. So when I do delete Bob, all of Bob's notes that we have on Bob, that should also be deleted as well. So that way we don't have any loitering data and have any orphan data that has no way of us to reach it. So this is a very important step. And we'll kind of display this more later on when we are going to put it inside of our views and stuff. So that's the reason why we do need a dependent destroy. And then this one will only be on the has many or has one. So I'll put that as a note. So it will only be in the has many and has one. You wouldn't put this in a belongs to or anything else. So that's what this would look like. So let me go ahead and select this out here. So you have the notes there. So that's associations. And associations are a little bit hard because it's a little bit tough sometimes to figure out the relationship. But the good rule of thumb is that if you do have data that is needed from another piece of object, so if one object needs information from another object, that is going to be needing associations, right? You need to have a way for it to communicate to each other. So that is what associations are. It's the relationship between each of the models. So we need to do that inside of the database as well as inside of the models here. But yeah, we'll get into good practice of that. We can do one more just so we can get into a habit of what the has one is. So let's create another field here. Let's go ahead and create another model. This would be the address model. So the address model has a state, city, zip, etc. And then it also belongs to a contact. So with the relationship between this table, let's just assume that everyone just has a single mailing address. That's what I mean. But you could technically have multiple address as well. So that could also work as a has many as well. But just for example's sake, I'll just have this one be a has one. So it'll be a has one relationship. So contact, a single contact has one address. And an address belongs to a contact. So how that works is that Jill lives on this particular street, this particular state, city, and zip. So that's how that would work. And it will belong to that Jill contact that we have saved. So let's go ahead and create that. I think I am missing one more field. I'm missing street. So let me go ahead and add that field real quick. Oh. Let me add in street here, because that also makes sense of what the street address is. So this would be street, that would be type of string. So I'll add that up as well. So let's go ahead and create that model. So that way it will also create that table within the database. So to create a model again is going to be bundle exec Rails G model. And then is it address or addresses?
Address.
Address.
Yep, so this would be address singular because your models are singular, your controllers are plural. And then it will be followed by the different fields. And the cool thing is that if you don't specify the data type, it will default to a string. So here, even though that I could technically do string here, because this is such a common data type, I can just say street and that will default to a string. And I can do that also with the state as well as the, what's the other one? City, that's that one. So those are all default to a string, but for example, for zip, that would be a integer because that one I do want a different data type. And then again, for it to be applied within the database of the relationship, I need to specify who the parent is. So it'll be contact, spelled correctly, colon, belongs to. So this will go ahead and create that association also in the database. And then that will give us a new migration file. And anytime that we have a new migration file, we should double check and make sure everything's all good. Yep. So that will be in our DB migrate, should be the most bottomest one. And that looks good. And this one is the important part of the foreign key. So that looks good. So now we'll go ahead and migrate. So if everything looks good in your migration file, we'll go ahead and do a bundle exec Rails DB migrate. Okay, so that is done within the database, right? So the association is already established within the database. So the schema within the address is up here because it formats it alphabetical as well. So the address has the contact ID and then the foreign key of addresses here. So that should be all good to go in the backend. But we also need to go ahead and reflect that inside of the model as well. So address here belongs to contact. That should be all good to go. So the child should be already handled. But here inside of the parent, I need to find out the relationship the other way around as well. So this one, in this case, would be a has one address. And it's address singular because it's a has one. If it's a has many, then it'll be addresses, the plural version of that word. So that's why I would try to stick with model names that are easy to pluralize. Like people in person, that might be a little bit hard to do, especially when coding. But if you do these words where you add an S or ES at the end, those would be a lot more manageable when you are coding. So also think about your model names as well. So yeah, so that is the associations if we were to do one more level. And then we can go even more if we want to as well, but we'll stop there for now because I also want to talk about these validations here. So that is going to be the next thing that you are going to be focusing on inside of your models is not only the associations, it's also going to be about validations. So let me select this out for, and then we'll add in more notes as we go. So essentially what validations are is that it also comes with the word as well, but it ensures that the data going into the database follows a specific rule. So it makes sure the the data going to the database matches the requirement. And you've probably seen some of these already. So make sure that you do fill out this section, or you are going to be within the right age for you to sign up, things like that. So those are different validations, right? So you're validating a certain field to make sure that it meets a certain requirement before you actually go into the database itself. If it doesn't meet these conditions, then it won't go to the database at all. It won't even reach that because this requirement has not been met. So let me give you, there's a lot of validations out there, but I'll give you the most common ones, what each of them are, and then I'll give you examples of each of them. Some of them don't make sense inside of this project. It'll make more sense in different projects. So I'll give you different examples with some of these too. So I'll copy and paste some of these examples once I have them in. So the first one is going to be confirmation. Second one is going to be inclusion. Another one is going to be length. That's a common one. The next one is going to be numericality or numerically, however you want to pronounce it. And then there is going to be a very common one that you would probably use the most is going to be presence. And then this one is pretty self-explanatory of uniqueness. Okay, so let me explain each of those, what each of those means, and then I'll give you an example of some of these validations. And then we'll go through actual validations of what we can put for each of the models. So confirmation, what this is that it actually needs to pair up with not only the model, but also the views and a little bit of the controllers as well. So this makes sure that two fields within the form is matching. So that is the confirmation section. And I would actually hold this off until later on to give you an example of this. But this is where when you sign up for a new account is your password and your password confirmation. That's the validation of confirmation here, is to make sure that those two fields, they are matching. So yeah, we'll go into an example of that a little bit later on when we go into the views. This is more for the model stuff. Inclusion, it makes sure that a particular field, so make sure that a field is included within a given set. So let me show you what I mean by that with this example. Within a given set. And I'll slack this whole thing out once I give this. So again, this doesn't make sense for this project, but let's say that we have another project. Yeah, there we go. And let's say that that model is going to be a coffee model, right? So it's going to be a coffee model. So how that would work is that I am validating, and most validation starts with the keyword validates. So that's how you know it's a validation. And then it's followed up by a particular attribute or a particular field that it is that you want to validate. So these are the attributes that we have within our schema here. So let's just pretend that within the coffee, there is a field here called size, right? So this is what we are validating, is each of these fields here. So for this example, we are validating the size attribute or the size field. And we need to include that it is within the array. That's just shorthand of how to do an array. And we need to make sure that when they choose a size, it's either small, medium, or large. So if it is not that small, medium, or large, then it'll give you this message here. So that's how that inclusion is that we are making sure that it is within a given set. So this is really good for like sizes or anything else that you want to have be included within a set range or a set fields. This next one is going to be length. This is how many characters is able for you to type for that attribute. So it'll be how many characters you are letting them pass in for a field. So this is really useful for a password. So make sure that your password is 8 characters long, or make sure that your username is more than 6 characters, things like that. So that's where a lot of this length one is going to be applied to, is that you are specifying how long a particular field is. So let's just pretend that we have an example here of a person table. So the person's table here, they have a name, a bio, password, and registration number. When you are doing a validation of length, you can do that multiple ways. You can do it with a minimum, so minimum of 2 characters for the name, or a maximum of 500, or within a range. So this is between 6 and 20 characters for the password. Or you can set it a straight on number value. So this is that it has to be the number with 6 characters long. So that is how we are able to use length, is that you can do it in multiple ways, like how you see here. So numericality, this one is going to be a little bit broad, but this is to ensure that it is a type of number. Make sure a field is a type of number. So this is really good for if you are including age or any kind of other numeric value. You can pass in a validation to make sure that that is an integer or that is a float, things like that. So if you just do numericality, that will have it be able to pass in any number. So that could be an integer, a float, anything in that regard that would be okay for you to pass in. Or you can just specify, I only want integers, or I only want float types. So you can specify that within the validations. You can also do ranges as well. So greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to, that also works in this validation as well. So that's what that particular validation does, is that it ensures that it is a number value coming in. Presence, this one is to make sure that you are not passing in an empty field, not passing in an empty field. So if they just submit an empty form and there is some validation on some of those fields, that will spit it back saying that you need to fill out your email, name, etc. So let me give you an example of this. So within like the person's model again, let's say that they also have a name, login, and email. For them to create a new person or to do anything with the person, all of those fields needs to be filled out. So that's what this validation does, is that you can't pass in empty fields. It has to be filled out. There needs to be some presence there. And then uniqueness, this one, just make sure that that's very self-explanatory. Make sure that there is only one record with that unique attribute value. So make sure that it is the only value that is unique. So that is very similar of how we validate like emails. So make sure that the email is like the only email within the database with that particular email. And that's how that validation will look like. So that's what validations are. And again, you're not going to use all of them, but it's good to know some of them. And depending on what it is that you want to do, you can validate each of those things. So let me go ahead and we'll go ahead and validate some stuff for the contact. And then we'll go ahead and select this out. So here, let me check the schema real quick. So the contact has the first name, last name, friend, phone, and email, and age. So let's just do some validations for them to have to fill in all of those fields in order for them to be a contact, right? So let's do that. So that would be validates. Let's validate the first name, the last name, age. Let's also validate the email. And I believe there's phone. Oh, and also friend. And that would be this validation here of making sure that they don't pass in empty fields. So that would be presence true. And then we can add in additional validations as well. So let's go ahead and do the validates email as unique true. So let's just make sure that we only have a single email with that exact email address. So this would be uniqueness equals true. Let's do one more validation of the age, and that one should be a numericality type of validation. So that would be right here. So let's validate numericality as true, but let's do this one here of only integers. So they can't be like 4.5 years old or something like that. Let's go ahead and do that one here. So that would be validates and then the field name, which is going to be age. And this one would be numericality colon. And this one will be only integers, true. And we'll stop here. You can definitely go even more validations as well, like make sure the first name is however many characters, etc. But I would at least have a few of these in here. So that way you'll have multiple types of validations. So later on, when we go into our website, you will have to validate the front end. So validating the form on the front end to make sure that they are submitting stuff. But you also need to validate it here in the model, which is what we are doing here, and also another level within the database. And that's what we are doing inside of the database. So that way it is secure at each of those levels. So it will be a lot more harder for a hacker to go in and pass in a different thing within each of those fields because we are creating a validation here. So yeah, so definitely you can go above and beyond with validations. We just need a few ones here just to get the ball rolling here. And then you can also do the same thing within your other models. And we would typically do that in all of our models anyways. So you'll add in address as well as note validations as well. So that's those cases there. But I'll just leave it as is for now because I do want to talk about these two things here next. So those are validations, is that it is going to validate the information or the different fields coming in. So that way it follows the rules, as well as those rules are being met, then it can proceed on to the database portion. Or else if like the email is not unique or any of these are not being met, then it will give you back an error. Sweet. There's additional options that you can do as well. And I'll show you that within the lecture notes. They're pretty self-explanatory. Like if you want to say allow nil, that will allow them to put in nil. Same with blanks. Message is what specific message you want to say when there are errors. And then on let you specify what kind of action it is. So these are just additional options that you can add on into it. For example, if you want message, this is how a message would look like. Or if you want to do allow blank, this is how that would look like. So yeah, so those aren't as common, but just note that you are able to if you do need them. But in most cases, especially within our class, we won't be doing most of those things anyways. Okay. So let's go ahead and go into these few things next. It's going to be the methods as well as the callbacks. I'm actually going to do the callbacks first, and then I'll do the methods. How I did that of switching lines back and forth is that whatever you want to have up and down, go ahead and click on that line, and then I just did option, which is that one next to the command. And then you can move it up and down with the up arrow and the down arrow. So that's how you can move lines of code up and down. If you want to indent it, it would be the command and then the left and right bracket, the curly braces. So that will indent things over and back if you need to. So that's just a little bit of a side note there. So let's go ahead and talk about this next part, which are callbacks. So This will make a little bit more sense when we go into actions later on tomorrow. So essentially what a callback is that it will allow us to trigger logic based off of a event, based off of an event. So I'm gonna write out all of the individual callback functions, and then I'll give you example, and they will slowly make sense. But then tomorrow, when we go ahead and implement them, that will make a lot more sense there. So we have before validation. And after validation. We also have before save, after save. And then there's also a round save as well that will happen before and after. And then there's also before create and after create. And a round create as well. So these are the most common ones that you would typically see in the model is these callbacks here. So let me give you an example and then I'll try to explain what it is that they do. So depending on where we are at within the process, whether we are validating something or saving something or creating something, that would be an event that we are going to be looking for. And for that to be triggered, like when a validation does happen, I need to go ahead and run some sort of logic. So let me give you an example. So here we have a callback of the before saved. So before we save the credit card table, before we save any record within the credit card table, let's go ahead and run this logic here. So typically all of your logic is going to be methods that you would have. So this would be a method within your code or within your model. So before we save, let's go ahead and run this method. That's what it's saying. And again, you can do it with any other of these callbacks. So before we validate or before we create or round. So around will work before and after we save or before and after we create. So here, before we save the credit card within the database, we are going to encrypt the credit card number. So that way it's not a set in stone value within the database. So that is a good example of how we are going to be using a callback is that it would be a individual trigger. So when does this actually run? So before we save the credit card and then what it is that we are doing. So this is what exactly we are doing here. So that is a callback. So that's depending on what you're doing, that might be a rare case, but just note that you're able to trigger logic based off of event inside of your model. We'll be doing this idea more in the controllers more than the model. So this will make a little bit more sense tomorrow. And then this will lead on to the methods here. So within the methods, what we are going to have is that we'll technically have two different types of methods. So let's see if you will recognize each of these types of methods. So let me go ahead and copy one of these over. And this goes back to what we talked about on Monday, right? So there's this type of method, and then there's also this other type of method here. So what do you think this type of method is called? Any guesses? Here's a huge hint. This keyword self here. No one? What about this one here? Nothing, just crickets.
A self-defining method.
Close. So here we actually have the class method here. So going back to last week, we have one that is class method, and then this one is going to be a instance method. So this relates more to classes more than our other type of data. So class methods start with the keyword self. So that's a huge indicator of what it is. So if it starts with the keyword self, it is a class method. And with this is the type of method that we are able to do on the whole entire object as a whole. So this one here, this will apply for all of the data within the person's model, right? So that will be the whole entire data as a whole. And then to call this method, it is with the class name and then the method name. So that's how that works. Here within the instance method, you are able to go ahead and create the method by just how you've been doing it with just the name here, but without the self. But how this one would work is that you're able to go ahead and call it by each individual instance. So depending on who the person is, this message will change depending on who the message is for, right? So if we were to do this for Bob, this will be Bob Smith. So that method would change depending on the different instances of the person. Whereas here, we are just ordering all of the data by the first name. So that's a little bit different than what we are doing. Is that we're ordering all of them in the whole entire object. Whereas here, this would change depending on the type of object it is that you are doing. There is one more thing that kind of goes into methods as well. But this is one way of doing things. We're actually not going to do it this way. We are actually going to do it a different way. But what this is that you can serialize an array. How this one would work is that you can have multiple values that is stored within that one attribute. So let's just say this person has a bunch of hobbies. So that hobby would be an attribute, and then you can store multiple values within to that. That is one way of doing things. How we'll be doing it is that we'll have hobbies be its own model. So it would be its own model, and then it will belong to that particular person. So that way we're not going to be cluttering up a lot of our individual space here. So this is just additional notes that will be a lot more helpful later on. But just know that when we are working within our Rails project, we are going to have a fat model skinny controller. And again, we'll talk about controllers more tomorrow. So fat model skinny controller. What this essentially means is that any logic should be in the model. Any logic should be in the model. So if you need to sort something, or if you need to convert something over, or just grab a certain value from whatever it is, that should be handled within the model itself. The controller should only be in charge of particular actions. And we'll talk about actions more tomorrow there. So anything that you are going to be putting inside of the model, that will pertain to that particular object. You wouldn't put that logic in the controller, even though I think it still works, but we would prefer to have it more inside of this file here with that. So let's just recap everything we did. We actually did do a lot today, but it should be a lot more better than yesterday, that's for sure. And then we'll push this up to GitHub, and I'll Slack out a few things as well. Let me Slack this out as I talk. So today we are actually going to be dissecting Rails one by one. So that's why we're not tackling Rails as a whole. We're just tackling one piece at a time. So today's piece is mostly going to be around this area here of the database and the models. So within the database and models, when we generate a particular model, and we went through that with those steps, and you can take a look at those notes as well. That will in turn also create it inside of the migrations. So inside of DB migrate, these are all instructions that are going to be applied into the database. So everything that we are going to be doing, we also need to do it also in the database there. Every time that we do have a brand new migration file, we need to run the db migrate command. So that way it will apply those changes within the database itself. And then this is all of the stuff that is going to be inside of the database. So that's what the schema is. It's just a schematic of what everything has been done up to that point. Something else is that you could technically go into your database within your terminal. But again, we won't be doing it things like that. We'll be doing it with the controller and also with the views. So you can do it. You can put in some dummy code and things like that, but we're going to do it a different way. So that handles the database portion. And that is when you create a model, it also creates the initial stuff for the database as well. So that's these files here. Within the model itself, each of the model would have its own model file. And what we put into it is going to be associations, which is the relationship to other models. So that's these relationships that we specified here. And then here is the example of what we would put inside of the contact model. It will also have some validations. So validations is to make sure that the data going into the database matches a given set of rules. So these are a given set of rules that we are specifying of what you need to do in order for it to be saved within the database. So here are some examples, as well as different kinds of validations, as well as what we'll be doing for the contact. So go ahead and use that technique inside of the other models here as well. And that will help you out to kind of solidify those validations. And then for callbacks as well as methods. So callbacks will trigger logic based off of an event. So this will go ahead and run a particular method depending on what kind of callback it is that you are using. So it will run it when you save or before you save or after you save, things like that. So that's when it would trigger. And the methods itself, we actually have two different types of methods. We have a class method that will pertain to the whole object as a whole. And we also have an instance method, which will pertain to each individual record within that database. And then we talked about fat models and skinny controllers. So anything logic-wise, that would be here within the model itself. So what I would recommend is that I would, well, a few more things before we close off, is that if you're not going to use this project anymore and any other Rails project that you are going to be doing, make sure you delete this node modules folder. So go ahead and just do a delete, and that will go ahead and remove that and put it to trash. If you do want those back, all you need to do is just to run this command right here of yarn, and that will get those node modules back. And that is how you're able to run the application. So what essentially the node modules is that it's just a bunch of libraries and packages on the JavaScript side. So they do take up a lot of space and everything like that. So typically, if we don't have a individual set of node modules, we can go ahead and remove that from our database. So we don't need to have that within our system at all. Go ahead, Freddie.
Where is that node modules? I can't seem to find it.
It's alphabetical, so you might need to collapse it, and then it will be a particular folder inside of here.
Okay. Is it inside of app?
Nope, it's outside
It's
in
just
the
a
main
folder.
directory. Yep.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Thank you.
So yeah, I would do that for projects you're not going to be working on. But if you are working on it, just leave it be. And then once you're done with it, then you would go ahead and remove it. The other thing is that these are the steps that we just did today, somewhere right here, within the sheets, right? So we just did inside of the Rails references, we did the initial project steps, as well as the model steps here that is outlined here. We also talked about migration. So again, if you want to change anything within your database, that will be this migration here. And then this goes into the database commands, and we talked about those. We didn't talk about this one, but that's how you would delete a database if you want to. And you can also go ahead and do it all in one line. You don't have to do it one by one. You can do it all in one line, which is pretty cool. And that's those steps that we did so far. So the next step is to jump into the controllers. And that's what these steps here is going to be outlining. But that is going to be for tomorrow. So we'll leave controllers for tomorrow. We're actually going to be creating a whole new project. We're building something completely different, just so we can kind of get those initial steps down and set in stone. And then we'll talk more about the individual controllers and views. Go ahead, Daniel.
Are we deleting node modules?
Yes.
And we just right click on it and click delete, right?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
One more thing before we are going to let you all go. Let's go ahead and push this final version into GitHub, and then we can go into things. Go ahead, James.
This is mostly just out of curiosity. When you say model, is there a big difference between model and creating a table, or is it just table just in Ruby talk?
So yeah, so a model is actually going to be representing a table, but inside of SQL. So it's going to be that same thing, but inside of Rails.
I see. And my other question real quick is, so what we're building right now, what we're mapping out with the Lucid charts and things like that, is that categorized as like database architecture?
Yep. So when we are figuring things out inside of Lucid chart here, and I'll send this out. This is going to be not only figuring out the different types of tables and their relationship, this also outlines the different models and their associations as well.
And that itself is considered data architecture, right? When people say I'm a database architect, this is what they're doing.
Yep, essentially. Yep, it's building out these different tables and relationships and fields. Yep.
Cool, thank you.
So yeah, we just did the get flow real quick of getting add, and then we'll do a get commit. And then finally we did a get push origin master. So once you have all that, your GitHub should be all good to go. And then we are going to leave it up for tomorrow for when we do this all again, but this time we'll skip all of the nitty gritty, go straight into the main meat of the models, and then we'll go into the controllers and slow things down with the controllers. Sweet, that is all I have for you all. Let me also send this out for you all. And then you all should be good. But yeah, I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you.